Hey everybody, welcome back to Coast to Coast. I'm your host, Crina Mustafa, alongside Calvin Wetzel. And on today's show, we're going to discuss a couple of things. One being the situation with the charter flights in the playoffs. We were supposed to have it, then we went back on it, and now we kind of have them again. So we're going to get into that. Then we're also going to get into some awards because it is officially awards season. And finally, wrap up with a race to the playoffs because as of this point, 5 teams have clinched and there's still a few spots left in the running. Cal, you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Let's go. All right. Our headline of the week: charter flights in the playoffs. So originally, Kathy had announced that the charter flights would be available for every single team in the playoffs. It was part of the growth of the charter program, as we kind of saw it happening a little bit this season, where players are getting charters on back to backs, and we're starting to see a little bit more growth, I would say, in that area. Maybe not at the rate that we would want it to be, but it's still kind of happening. And something interesting happened where it looked like Kathy kind of went back on what she said. There was a bit of reporting done by the Next where they said between rounds, teams will have the option to charter from the home market or directly to game one of the following round. Only one route permitted, not both. Therefore, teams will need to plan their own commercial flights if and when necessary, depending on their choice. And that's on reporting from the Next. Cal, what do you think about that? Like, just firstly, like, just saying at first, everybody's going to have charter flights, and then kind of going back on it and going, oh, actually, no, you only get one.
Yeah. So, my first thought on this was exactly what I think that article that you put the tweet up on the screen there. There was a quote in there from Satu Sabli, I believe it was, right? So, don't make promises you can't
Mm-hmm.
keep. Whatever the quote was, that was exactly my first thought too. You should be able to do this, but if you can't, then just don't say you can. In all of life, honestly, that it's not just a WNBA thing, just a good principle to live by. And I was thinking, I don't know if this is weird or if it's just me, but when I watch a crime show or scary movies and they're in, there's a kid and their parent or something, and they're in this bad situation, and the parents oh, it's gonna be okay, we're gonna be fine, I promise. And I'm like, don't promise that. You're probably about to die. You can't promise that you're gonna be okay. Don't use that word if you don't know. Like, and that was my thought. Just if you say it, then do it, then deliver. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously now we saw just a few hours ago before recording this that they are going to deliver, but it shouldn't have taken that pressure to get them to that point. Once they said it should have just come through. So that was my biggest thought. And then obviously when it comes to charters in general, you should just be able to do it. We have all of these owners and just in general, I feel like rich people saying "Hey, we would love to help you pay for this." And women's sport, I've told people this before, even if you're a completely misogynistic piece of trash, women's sports is a great investment right now, selfishly, financially. It's not even a charity or oh, hey, I'm trying to promote equality. It's a booming business, in terms of you will make money by investing from it, even if you don't care about women at all. So we have all these people who want to, let's just let them. How about let's just let them do it, and we can easily pay for these charter flights. So I'm glad to see that they finally are, that the pressure worked, but that was my whole thought process throughout this.
Yeah, there's a couple things that we can dissect from this situation slash issue. The first one, kind of like what you touched on, if you say something, if you're going to promise something, then you have to do it. To me, it just seems weird that already the charter situation is kind of growing, but again at a very slow pace. And when you do promise something like charter flights for everybody in the postseason, and the fact that it took just like another conversation between the union and Kathy, apparently all of a sudden charters for all. Well, so then if you could do it, why did you backtrack on it in the first place? That's the question that I'm asking. What did they do or what did they say to Kathy for her to be like, actually, I can figure it out? Because why is that not your intention in the first place? Like, why do we have to push you against the wall for you to be like, okay, actually, no, you can have it. It's fine. And you want to talk about like the price differences too. Like, I think I read in the article that it's like a $20,000 difference for the charter flights that teams could pay. Not all of them could, but if you have like these owners and if you implement like you said, a lot of rich people to just invest in it, like it's more than good enough to be done. We talk about that those $75 million that the W got a few years ago. Where did they go? Because did they go to the charter flights situation? I don't know. I don't know where that money went. Like there hasn't really been a sort of transparency when it comes to that. Um, and just on in general with the situation, like it's a professional league. Like these are professional athletes. Like it's not just about, and I know the whole thing in the CBA is that not we're not allowed to have charter flights because it's a competitive advantage for teams that can afford it versus not, but it's not even about that at that point. It's about the safety of the players and just an overall standard for what a professional league should be, because a lot of these players are coming from college where they do have charter flights. And so they're just going backwards once they enter a pro league, which is something they shouldn't have to do.
Yeah, well, it is about the safety of the players. Like you're 100% right, but I also think it is a little bit about like the competitive advantage thing that you brought up. To me, I'm like, why not? Like, why can't there be a competitive advantage for teams that want to invest in their players? Like, they deserve to win more games. If you want to invest in your players' safety, then why don't you deserve to have a competitive advantage for doing the right thing? Like, let's let them have a competitive advantage if they're willing to put money into women's sports and into their players' safety. That's my thought. So I don't have a problem with it. Like I get we don't want some team to go 40-0 and some team to go 0-40, but that's not going to happen. Like you're not going to win every game just because you charter. Like, you know,
Yeah.
like every other professional league has gone through this before, you know, and men's professional league, I should say, and like you're still going to lose some games. So let's just let it happen. And then the owners who aren't paying for their players to charter, like they're going to be pressured to get to that point, and eventually we'll see everyone there.
Yeah, and I think also just on the topic of promising and talking versus delivering versus like investing in women's sports right now, I think like you can also tie like expansion and charter flights seem to be like two of the biggest like touchy topics when it comes to growing the league right now, and they have a lot of common denominators and a lot of common things where it's just like it seems like there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest in charter flights. There's a lot of interest in expanding to other cities and other countries. But for some reason, it's not happening unless somebody is being pushed up against the wall and being held accountable. And the fact that it even has to get to that, because you'd think, you know, somebody like, and I don't want to harp on the league too much. I know there's a lot of different factors that go into a lot of things. It's not as simple as like, just give them this or just do this. But at the same time, like with this situation, okay, now they all have charter flights, just like you said in the first place. So like if that was the case, then why does there have to be this backtracking, and why does this have to be this lack of transparency? It's just not fair to the players, it's not fair to the fans, it's not fair to anybody. And it's just like it ruins some of your credibility too, some of your authority as like the league, and it's really frustrating, and it's a problem that we've been dealing with for so long. And I finally thought we were like going in a good direction this season with the charter program, but this just feels like an extremely weird situation.
Yeah, I like you said it. If they're able to do it, why do they have to be pressured into doing it? Why not just do it? Like if you can't do it, you can't do it. But obviously they can, so it shouldn't take this pressure.
Yeah, more confusing than the her hoop stats hoop grids. Anyway, we'll get to that later. Just kidding, totally. But no, it's okay. That's enough on that situation. We had our rants about the charters. We just want, like, honestly, we just want the players to get what they deserve playing in a professional league, and it just seems like everybody should have the same intentions. But moving on, because it is awards season. And we're basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through like 2 awards per week just based on the schedule, because they're kind of like spread out in which they're gonna be announced by the W. So the awards that we are doing this week are Executive of the Year and Coach of the Year. We're gonna start with the Exec of the Year. Cal, I'll let you go first. Let me preface this by saying that Cal and I agree on who we think should win this award. I am just gonna say another person, another candidate, just to have a fun conversation. So, Cal, who's your exec of the year?
That's a good note because yeah, I was texting Crina before this, like, all right, here's who I'm gonna pick, and she was like, "Oh, me too," but that's boring. Let me go with someone different, so it's fun. But everyone should know what you really think. I'm going with Jonathan Kolb. I think like when it comes to exec of the year, so we'll get to coach of the year in a second. And coach of the year is a little bit more wide open to me with some of those teams at the top, but with exec, it's got to be one of the two super teams. And so because you built, they're super teams. They like to say they're not, but they are. And the execs built these, right? So I'm looking at the Liberty and what Jonathan Kolb did in terms of signing Brianna Stewart, signing Courtney Vandersloot, trading for Jonquil Jones, trading for Kayla Thornton. That all happened this past offseason, with the exception of really Sabrina and Benijah Laney. He basically built the majority of the super team over the offseason. Whereas the Aces, obviously, when you bring in Candace Parker and Alicia Clark, like those are big signings, and you can't really hold the Candace Parker injury against them for this award. But at the same time, like most of that Aces super team was built through the draft several years ago when they had 3 straight number 1 picks with Kelsey Plum, Asia Wilson, Jackie Young. Most of the Liberty super team was built this year. So this year, exec of the year has to be Jonathan Kolb to me.
Yeah, and I think I would feel kind of iffy about naming like the Aces for exec of the year just because of the whole Derek Hamby situation, and it just feels like there's
Also
been a
that,
lot of murky stuff like this year. So I would not
yeah,
be
the
comfortable
salary
like
cap
giving them.
circumvention type of
Yes,
stuff.
all of
Yeah,
this kind of stuff that's kind of happened over the course of the year. I'm like, maybe they
you
should
can't
not be
really
in
go
the
that route.
conversation for that, like super team or not. There's been some questionable stuff, and like with the Becky being suspended this year too. Like it was all just like a very weird situation slash year. But for me, okay, like I said before, I agree that it should be JK, it should be Jonathan Kolb. I think what he did with the Liberty this year, just assembling all these pieces together and just seeing the way that they've been able to gel together over the course of a season and what they have become, I think like is incredible. And it was like so risky, but like those are the moves that get you where you want to be. So I'm gonna say Lynn Dunn of the Indiana Fever. Just based on what they've done, like I know they're not in the playoffs. I know they are where they are, but overall they've had like a pretty exciting year. Obviously, they drafted Aaliyah Boston, they drafted Grace Berger, and they both signed them for 3 years. Erica Wheeler also signed a 2-year contract with them in the offseason. The future looks good. I think we saw flashes of what this Fever team could be. I think they still have a little bit to go, like still a little bit of movement is going to have to happen. But overall, even though the wins started to like fall off a bit in the second half of the season, I think that they've shown that they're assembling a good and young squad that eventually is going to be a playoff team. They were almost a playoff team this year, but it just takes a little bit to get there. And I think what Lynn Dunn has done with this team. Oh wow, that was kind of hard to say. Lynn Dunn has done with
Oh,
this team.
look at
Okay,
that.
look at that, discovering puns when you're just saying sentences. But I think like she deserves to at least be like recognized for something. I don't think, obviously, do not think that she's going to win it because my pick is Jonathan Kolb. But I still think that like overall, the vibes in Indiana are way better than they were previously.
They are for sure, and I mean, everyone knows me, knows how much I love Grace Berger. So anytime you draft Grace Berger, I think that puts you in the conversation
Yeah,
alone.
that
Just
alone,
making that
that
draft pick.
alone. Forget
That alone.
Aaliyah.
I do
Just
think
forget.
though, I do think Lynn Dunn, on a serious note, is going to be in this conversation in coming years because, like you said, they're going in the right direction. This year actually went extremely well for the Fever when you consider that they locked up best odds at the number 1 pick while also showing significant signs of progress and winning some
Exactly.
games. So really got the best of both worlds. And the next 1 or 2 off seasons are going to be critical for them. So we could easily see Lynn Dunn right
It
up
could
there
be
in this
her next
conversation a
year.
year from now. Yeah, a year from
Yeah.
now, 2 years from now, who knows?
Because like who knows who they might pick up and who they might acquire to be the second star on that team. So yeah, no, it'll be definitely be interesting. Let's move on to coach of the year. Like I said before, I agree with Cal's pick. Cal, go ahead. Who is your coach of the year?
Yeah, so this one, like I was saying, feels more wide open. I think there's a few candidates. I think really when you look at any of the top 4 teams in the standings right now, there's at least some sort of an argument for any of those coaches. But I'm going with Stephanie White This team lost 2 starters, obviously, including Jonquel Jones, a recent MVP. Steph White kept them right there in terms of contenders after those 2 super teams, right at the top. They lost Bree Jones in the middle of the season. Didn't really feel like they skipped a beat, which is not any shade to like what Bree Jones brings. She's an all-star, but it's how I think Stephanie White has been able to keep this team sort of glued together. Alyssa Thomas has said that she believes a lot of her success this year, and obviously she was already good, but she's sort of taken it to that next level this year, and she's credited Stephanie White's offensive system with that. She's averaging a career high assist by far. And I look at how much of a rejuvenation we've seen from DeWanna Bonner, too, at age 36. Offensively, I
She's
think
the
that's a big
MVP of
credit to
my
Stephanie
fantasy
White.
team, so
Yes. And she's like the third oldest player in the league, and she looks like she's 27. So, like, obviously credit to her too. But I think a lot of the success that the Sun are seeing is credit to Stephanie White and what she's been able to do just in her first year with this team. So for me, she's my coach of the year.
yeah, and if you go listen to the latest episode of They've Got Now, shout out Mark Schindler. He just released an episode with Beck Allen, who got traded to the Sun this year, and she kind of also spoke about how they've changed up the way that they play defense and all the ways that she's been able to grow and been able to thrive on this team too. So I think Stephanie White deserves a lot of credit for what she's done this year, and she would be my pick. I think like Sandy and Becky are obviously going to be in the conversation for sure. But again, I went like super off the board and I went with somebody else to be creative. And it is kind of ironic who I chose just based on like where he was last year, like coaching the Connecticut Sun. But I chose Kurt Miller, head coach of the LA Sparks. I think, we've talked about the Sparks a lot these last couple of weeks. And I think what they've been able to do, they have struggled with injuries more than any other team this season. I feel like it feels like every single day their injury report is just like extremely massive, but somehow they find themselves still in playoff contention, still playing some really good basketball. They've had some really impressive wins this season, including one over the Las Vegas Aces. So I just think, it's not only like Kurt is a really good coach, like X's and O's and all that, but I also think that it's just his attitude and the way that he does lead a group. Like I watch a lot of the videos that the Sparks post after any of their wins, and like when Kurt gives like these speeches in the locker room, and just the way that he lifts the team up and like kind of lets them know what they did well and what they need to do for the next game. I just think it's a really important quality to have as a coach, and it's a reason why they've been able to be super resilient this entire season, and why they just might make that final 8 to head into the postseason. So yeah, I think he deserves some love too.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like what he's done there is incredible, and especially with like the pieces that he's been able to make fit together. I love seeing how Leja Claren's career has sort of resurrected after a year out of the league, and what Kurt Miller has been able to do with them on both sides of the ball. And like you said, with just moving pieces in and out, even like NECA missed a game or two,
Yeah.
and like I don't know if they've had a single player play every game this season. I think they've started 12 different players throughout this season. So with that kind of revolving door to keep this team in playoff contention is really impressive.
Revolving door is a great way to put it. That's actually a really great way to put it. I did not think about it like that. But yeah, so those are kind of our candidates for Executive of the Year and Coach of the Year. Let us know what you guys think and if anybody else should be kind of like first in those talks. But yeah, let's move on to our last segment, the race to the playoffs. The other day, I think it was yesterday, I posted a poll where I said there was 1 week left in the regular season. So far, 5 teams have clinched a playoff spot. Who grabs those final 3 spots? And based on the responses, people are very confident in the Atlanta Dream and the Washington Mystics to make the playoffs. And then that leaves like one more spot for that final 8th seed. I know we talked a lot about like, are we worried about the Atlanta Dream? And it's been kind of like up and down. And now that like the Mystics have started to struggle with injuries again, which honestly really sucks for them, is there a potential case where like the Mystics fall to maybe 7, 8, and somebody else is able to get up there?
Yes, there is. And I will say this is our 3rd episode, and we are 2 for 2 in talking about things when we record on Tuesday afternoon that end up being completely wrong by the time everyone listens to this. And the Mystics play the Mercury tonight. That game will have happened by the time everyone listens to this. So we might make it 3 for 3, but I'm just going to go for it anyway. I don't think this is a gimme game at Phoenix. This game that will have already happened. Maybe I look dumb. Maybe Washington wins by 30. But the Mercury have had one of the best home court advantages in all of the league this year. They've only won one game on the road, but they're almost 500 at home. They beat the Sun twice at home. They beat this Mystics team by like 18 at home. Even they didn't have Elena Deladon, but still, she's about the only player they have back that they didn't have in that game. They were
And
without
also, like,
Atkins.
it was her birthday yesterday, right? So maybe she's like still recovering from having fun, maybe.
Yeah, well, if you subscribe to Danny Barlavi's philosophy, it's the opposite, that everyone plays extremely better on their birthday or the day after. So we will find out. You might be right though. At
Yeah.
least in the first half. Maybe a slow start. Maybe a slow start. Um,
Maybe, yeah. But let's look at these remaining schedules again. So the Dream have the Storm, the Mystics, the Wings. Mystics have Mercury, Dream, Liberty. Sparks have Sun, Liberty, Storm, and the Sky have Fever, Lynx, Sun. I think out of these four teams, it's safe to say that the Sparks have the most difficult schedule to close out the season. So my other question is, because they have such a tough schedule to close it out, do the Sky have a chance to get in there? Do they have a chance to push someone out of the top 8? Because right now they're in that 9 spot and it's looking a little bit iffy.
yeah, the Sky have a chance for no other reason that they have a weirdly high ceiling and low floor this year, I feel like. And you see games where they look like they could beat anybody, and you see games where they look like they never played basketball before. And if it's the former, they can compete with even this tough schedule that they have down the stretch, and they're only one game out. They have the tiebreaker on the Sparks, so it's absolutely
Mhm.
possible. And like you said, some of these other teams have tough schedules too. The Sky, they still have to play the Lynx, the Sun, but Sparks still have to play the Sun, still have to play the Liberty. The Mystics go to the Liberty at the end of the season and have to play the Dream, who are right there competing for these spots as well. Like, none of these teams really have easy schedules down the stretch. So anything could happen. I don't like all of these teams are going to take at least one more loss, I think.
Yeah.
And like the bottom line, I before this pod when I was prepping, I thought about like trying to put together like all the scenarios, like if this, then that, here's what will happen. And then I looked at it, and it's like 500 plus scenarios still, combinations of like the relevant games left between these teams that matter. So I was like, no, forget that. My head is spinning. Let's just say I'm almost positive that it'll come down to the last day on Sunday, just like it did last year with the Dream and the
Mhm.
Liberty. I think that's going to happen again, at least with two of these teams, maybe three, maybe all four. And I love that the WNBA schedules it to where all 12 teams play and there's 6 games on that day, because it's such theater to see when teams are still fighting for stuff and they're all playing at the same time. I think that's what's going to happen.
It's funny when you say, like, you were thinking about, like, writing out all the scenarios, because I just wanna give a quick shout out to Las Vegas Aces PR, Chiggy. Like, he for the like, every single day for the last, like, week, he has been sending out, like, emails with how will the Aces clinch the first seed with all these different scenarios, and, like, the first time I tried to go through it, I was like, I am not smart enough to comprehend what all these scenarios, like, this team would have to win this and lose this if the Aces were to lose a game. So like basically the Aces just have to win the rest of the season and they'll be fine. But if they lose, that's when all the mathematical stuff starts to come into play. And I feel like it's gonna be the same, like you said, like with these like bottom like 6, 7, 8, 9 standings on the last day, which is kind of stressful for them. Like even like not to bring up Mark's pod again, but like Beck was kind of talking about how she felt a lot better this year being able to clinch that third spot with the Connecticut Sun rather than like last year when she was with the Liberty and it was decided at the very last minute, because that must be very stressful as a player when you have no idea what is about to happen and then you have like very little prep time once it does happen.
Yeah, you should always bring up Mark's pod, by the way, because we stand Mark Schindler on this podcast.
That's correct.
But the Aces, the biggest thing that benefits them is the fact that the Mercury are the only team that they have left on their schedule. And they play them twice. They do have to go there, which, like we talked about, is not necessarily a gimme. Aces are not losing that game at home. They're probably not losing that game on the road either, but they might have to at least try. I don't know if they're going to be able to chill out and coast and rest everyone in that game, because they probably won't have clinched yet that
Coast to
that game at
coast.
Phoenix. So, oh, I see what you did
Oh.
there. I set you up unintentionally,
Yeah, it's
throwing
okay.
lobs.
People don't have to know it's unintentional.
I planned it the whole time. Been getting those emails too, and it's funny because it like all those scenarios, it's just like drives you crazy. But almost certainly none of those are going to come into play because the Aces are going to take care of business. But the ones that are going to
Mhm.
come into play are going to be the ones between those four teams on the cut line for the 8 seed. And it's crazy how you can be like 4 days till the end of the season and you think, oh, there's not very many games left. But there are still so many scenarios because even if every team has 2 games left and there's four teams left, 8 games could go 8 different ways, and then that affects like everything down the line in terms of tiebreakers. Which, by the way, this is a Her Hoop Stats podcast. I feel like I should plug on Her Hoop Stats. If you go to the orange banner at the top where the grid game is, right next to it, there's I forget what it's called. It's whatever it says next to the grid game, like season summary or something. If you click on that, there's a grid of schedules. So it has like all the teams on the left, all the teams on the top. So helpful if you want to look at like who's going to win what tiebreaker, like head to head. Like this team is 2-1 against this team, and they have 1 game left or whatever. Go check that out if you are one of those deranged people who actually tries to wrap your mind around all of this, because I think it's an extremely good resource.
That's funny, especially that you called people deranged.
Well,
That's
I kind
wonderful.
of do it. I'm making fun of myself too, but I gave up for this podcast. I'll probably do it again in a couple days when the number of scenarios
Yeah.
is significantly
Yeah,
less.
yeah.
But it is
It
fun sometimes.
it is fun. It is fun for the nerds. It's always funny because I always think to myself, "Oh, I went into sports because I can't do math," and then there's situations like this that pop up where I'm like, "Did I make the right decision?" I don't know. Then you kind of start contemplating everything. But no, it's fine. It's good. I like really, really respect the people who do the work to lay out all those scenarios and situations. And like I said before, like really shout out Aces PR for doing that. Because they were probably just like, we don't want you to ask us about it, so we're just gonna do it for you and send it out so that nobody has any kind of questions of like, oh, like what will happen if this team wins or blah blah. So no, I really, really respect that. And yeah, we'll see what's gonna happen. Like you said, by the time this pod hits your feeds, the games on Tuesday night may or may have been decided. We'll see if we go 3 of 3 with jinxing results and things like that. But that's what we do here on Coast to Coast. So I think that's a great way and a great place to wrap it up. We kind of mentioned it throughout the pod, but the Her Hoop Stats grid, the Hoops grid, is up still. So make sure you're playing that. Their favorite players are playing it. Your favorite players' favorite players are playing it. I love saying that. It's really fun to say. But yeah, go check that out. You can find us on social media at Her Hoop Stats. And if you're watching us on YouTube, you can see Calvin and I have our Twitter handles on here. But if you're listening to us on the podcast, which by the way, we appreciate like the amount of support that we've gotten on Coast to Coast for the first couple of weeks. It's been really cool. Like, Cal, do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, no, I just what you said. I love hearing all the feedback and stuff that we've been getting. Whatever, not positive or negative, but like positive or like helpful, I guess is a better
Mm-hmm.
word.
But yeah, you can find us on social where you just heard. And we will see you next Wednesday as we start to get into more award season, as we get into playoffs, and maybe talk some lottery odds at some point too. But yeah, it's been Coast to Coast. Thanks for tuning in.